Good evening, tributes, and welcome back to Panem Reborn. I hope you guys are excited for this week. We've got a big quinquennial quell coming up, so I hope you're getting ready for that. And I just want to thank everyone who continues to watch and support this series. I may not always be able to respond to your comments, but I do see them, so I really appreciate that you guys are interacting with the series and taking time out of your day to comment. Thank you so much, and I hope you'll continue to watch. I just wanted to give a quick thank you to all the people who helped make this series possible, including Christian Blanco, who created the Tales of the Hunger Games series. That's the series that this series is based off of, and you can find his channel in the description below. Also, I'd like to thank Andrew McLean for kindly allowing me to use his artwork in this series. His blog is also linked below in the description. I'd like to thank my editors as usual, Raby and Anna, aka Octavian Stesia, so thank you guys so much for helping me edit some of the episodes of this series. And without further ado, let's dive into Panem for today. As this was the year of the 105th Games, a quinquennial quell, President Mace announced via a live Capital TV broadcast to all of Panem the first quell twist of the third incarnation. Over the broadcast, with all the eyes of Panem watching, he removed a white envelope and opened it, breaking the wax seal. As a reminder that the Capitol encourages the districts to appreciate their respective natural talents and the environment of our great nation as Panem recovers from war, all tributes will be given an animal companion of the same breed, which they may train at the training center and bring into the arena to act as a guide and helper. The twist provoked shock and confusion all around Panem, as many believed this to be a rather silly or strange twist that was quite unlike any that had ever been revealed in the past. However, President Mace did not stay long and allowed viewers to speculate on how this unconventional twist might affect gameplay, as well as what tricks the GameMaker team might have up their sleeves to take full advantage of it. Additionally, it was reported that pet store sales skyrocketed in Districts 1 and 2, as apparently the training academies were shelling out vast sums to procure animals on which their students could practice training for the games. Due to President Mace's economic changes implemented since the annexing and the beginning of the third incarnation, several districts' industries had been moved around or changed to lessen the burden of production on individual districts or assist with foreign trade following the Pan-Europe Agreement. District 11, which had formerly been assigned to produce fruit and dairy products, had been relieved of the need to tend dairy cows. Sector B of District 15 had taken on this duty after the annexing, transporting fresh dairy products via refrigerated hovercrafts to continental Panem. In addition, as a result of new treaties brokered by President Mace with the Alpine Republic, cacao would be planted and harvested in District 10 to be sent to the Alpine Republic for refinement into chocolate. This could be bought for special occasions by only Capitolites and Victors, the wealthiest in the nation, at a steep import price. District 10 would continue to produce livestock alongside planting and harvesting cacao from cacao trees, assisted financially in its early years by the capital, and encouraged to expand its population growth to accommodate these needs. This year's reapings in District 10 commenced with the annual televised speech of Mayor Hayworth. At the conclusion of this speech, the victor of the 104th Hunger Games, Alexander Nicholine, arrived on stage and had to be propped up slightly by a peacekeeper due to his slight inebriation. He casually plucked a strip of paper from the female reaping bowl first, reading out the name of 12-year-old Madura Diaz. A small, raven-haired girl with a skinny braid down her back and luminous brown eyes was picked out by the cameras in the crowd, being of such a small size that only one peacekeeper was needed to bring her to the front. Rosalia reported that she was one of the runners, smaller teenagers who helped transport cacao pods from the trees to the processing stations and were known for their speed and efficiency. Madura stared around in fright at the crowd from the stage, smoothing down her tattered orange dress as peacekeepers pulled her to the front. Alexander loosely shook her hand and stepped over to the male reaping bowl to draw a name. He read it out to be that of 18-year-old Heifer Muller, and the crowd quickly parted to reveal a hulking butcher's assistant with pale blonde hair and muscles the size of cheese wheels. He appeared surprised and a bit annoyed that he had been chosen, wiping his hands on his bloody apron, but did not fight the quartet of peacekeepers that arrived to bring him to the front with Madura. Rosalia commented on the amusing size contrast between Heifer and Madura as they sheepishly shook hands, noting that the larger boy could likely lift all of Madura with a single arm. The pair were marched off to the Justice Building without much ceremony, where Madura cried into her parents' shoulders and Heifer awkwardly hugged several members of a large extended family, including some smaller cousins who tried to hang on to him despite his efforts to scoot away. The comforting hugs of Madura's parents seemed to calm her down, allowing her to fix her messy braid and nod in determination. A few minutes later, the peacekeepers entered again to take them to the train, where they were to meet their mentor and begin preparing for the games. Heifer and Madura soon arrived at the train, where Heifer had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe. They greeted their assigned capital mentor, Aeschylus Somerville, with careful nods. He appeared far more excited than the pair to discuss the games and potential strategies, beginning to bore them at the dining table as he pulled out a large strategy chart he appeared to have made himself, with poorly drawn stick figures littering its pages. Madura timidly raised her hand, interrupting him, and asked how the quell twist would be implemented, wondering about what kind of animal the tributes would receive. Aeschylus pursed his lips and replied that they would not know until later, clearly irritated at the interruption of his presentation. Madura whimpered worriedly and stared into her lentil soup while appearing quite ill. As she got up a moment later to run to the restroom and vomit, Heifer wrinkled his nose in disgust. When she returned, her face quite ashy and withdrawn, Heifer hesitantly attempted to pat her on the back as if trying to clap the rest of the nausea out of her, seemingly for the benefit of himself and Aeschylus. Unfortunately, this hearty action only succeeded in making her more ill, and she darted back to the restroom to vomit again. Aeschylus scowled throughout the entirety of this scene and asked if Madura was quite done yet when she returned from the restroom a second time. She nodded weakly as Heifer crossed his arms and glared irritably into his squash risotto. The rest of the train ride quickly spiraled into disaster, as Madura was feeling too ill to return to the dining table, and Heifer seemed more interested in his lunch than paying attention to Aeschylus, who had spittle flying out of his mouth as he gestured wildly and preached about the virtues of looking pathetic, so that capital citizens would feel sorry for them as helpless outliers and sponsor them out of pity. Despite his efforts, he was continually drowned out by the sounds of a distressed Madura retching out the window. The train soon pulled into Mace Station amid Aeschylus's loud complaints that he had been unable to complete his elaborate presentation and his subsequent annoyance with his tributes, particularly Madura, whom he referred to as the Vomit Comet for the rest of the day. Madura stumbled out of the train onto the platform and almost bumped into a young man holding a violet poodle, sneezing as she did so. He appeared quite offended and snatched his poodle away from her, muttering about clumsy outliers. She quickly apologized, but the damage was done and most of the remaining crowd members drifted towards her district partner, who appeared confused and overwhelmed by the attention. Aeschylus berated Madura for her clumsiness, clearly in a worse mood than before, and warned her that this poor first impression would likely not get her very far with sponsors. After a few minutes of Madura standing quietly in the corner with their mentor, and Heifer allowing flustered capitalites to squeeze his biceps, the pair and their mentor left to visit their accommodation quarters for the first time. Once inside the apartment, the group were hastily flagged down by their stylist, Dolabella Harcourt. A flighty woman with garish makeup, she eagerly displayed her new designs to the pair and Aeschylus. Heifer and Madura stared at these designs with a mixture of revulsion and irritation, as Dolabella had decided that the best way to incorporate the district's two industries was by making a costume that was brightly patterned, half in cow spots and half in cacao pods. Heifer grew angry and bellowed that these costumes looked like a 12-year-old threw up on them, before clapping a hand to his mouth and quickly muttering that he meant no offense to Madura, who had raised an eyebrow and appeared resentful. As they were being fitted for the costumes and slowly being prepared to be sent down to the parade area, Aeschylus flipped on the television to show a recap of the reapings in District 7, which both of his tributes regarded intently. As they watched, Mayor Log tiredly made the yearly speech about the glory of Panem and its rise to power once more. Without further ado, a staggering Alexander Nicolai was brought out to perform the reapings, appearing even more under the influence than he had been earlier. This time, he did not even bother with any ceremony or ornament, snapping up a slip from the female reaping bowl and reading it aloud to be that of 15-year-old Isla Panem. A stocky girl with deeply tanned skin and dirty blonde hair stepped out from the crowd, shrugging off the consoling hands placed on her arms by friends and brushing dirt from the shoulders of her plain brown jumpsuit. She crossed her arms as she was made to stand at the side of the stage, staring ahead calmly and seeming to inch away from Alexander in order to avoid his sloppy, uncoordinated actions. He then moved to the male reaping bowl and plucked the name of 16-year-old Arbor Said from within. A stocky boy with close-cropped black hair and dark eyes shuffled forward and was tugged to the front by peacekeepers, though he wrenched himself from their grasp the moment he was on the stairs to the stage. The pair shook hands, regarding each other warily as if sizing each other up. While Isla continued to maintain a poise about her and squared her shoulders as they were led away, Arbor's eyes shifted around and he tensed whenever a peacekeeper drew close to him, his hand flying to a long scar across his arm almost involuntarily. The tributes were escorted to the Justice Building to meet their families one final time. Isla was hugged by a few very young siblings, who cried loudly and expressed their hopes that she did not end up like Great Aunt Lilac, which she graciously tried to deflect by assuring that she would try not to. Meanwhile, Arbor was greeted by his parents, grandparents, and sister, who patted him on the back and reminded him to never let them hold control over him, though it was unclear who they meant by them. He attempted to ask them for advice in the event that there were no tools he could identify in the arena, though they struggled to answer this question and began to debate amongst themselves, which seemed to annoy him greatly as he reminded them that he was being sent off to die, and this was not the best time to bicker. The tributes were taken a few minutes later by peacekeepers to the train station, ready to depart for the capital. The pair from Seven were introduced on the train to their mentor for this year, Gallus Tressel. A tall and burly man, unusual for a capitalite, he cheerfully welcomed them and encouraged them to eat plenty of protein at the dining table to prepare their bodies for the games. Though the train did not have far to go, as District 7 was not extremely far from the capital, the pair spent the time piling various meats, vegetables, and cheeses onto their plates and eating them with reckless abandon, while Gallus pressed them for information on their skills and abilities. Isla revealed that she was a skilled communicator and hard worker, as she was responsible for taking inventory at a wood chopping firm and worked closely with other logistics officers. Arbor declared with a certain swagger that he was talented at carpentry and could wield a saw better than his own boss, causing Isla to quirk an eyebrow suspiciously and remark that this seemed a bit arrogant to her. He glared in response and demanded that she demonstrate her own skills if she was going to criticize him. But before the argument could escalate, Gallus intervened and separated them. Isla shrugged and bounced off to her carriage for a nap, while Arbor stewed in silence in the main carriage, though it seemed that he had noticed Gallus putting in a tape of some past games and was mildly interested in the commentary. Isla finally reappeared after around an hour and flopped down on a couch after getting some rest, where she and Arbor reluctantly listened to Gallus discuss how perception was everything, as he jabbed a finger at the screen, remarking that the boy from 15 would not have been so popular with the Capitol in the 103rd Games if he had not shed his clothes for them, and the careers in the 104th Games had been showered with gifts due to their strong presence before the games in their interviews and training. As his tributes watched, Gallus sized them both up and remarked that while they could both use some green eyeliner to freshen up their looks, they would both go over well if they presented themselves as energetic and ready to fight for victory rather than unkempt and stereotypical outliers. Arbor and Isla exchanged careful glances and nodded at each other as Gallus said this, their argument from earlier dissolving in the face of their shared challenge. As the train pulled into Mace Station and Gallus shepherded his tributes out onto the platform, he reminded them to maintain a good first impression, as this was what many Capitolites on the platform would remember when choosing who to sponsor. The pair greeted the Capitol citizens, nervously allowing themselves to be poked, prodded, and ogled in their attempts to follow their mentor's advice. They posed for a few photos and shook hands with a few notable citizens, looking around furtively as if searching for guidance on how to act around the excited Capitolites. Isla even received some hair ribbons from some young girls at the station, who seemed starstruck to be attending their first ever platform viewing and had brought small gifts for their favorite tributes after viewing the reapings. Gallus soon sensed that the experience was becoming a bit of a sensory overload for his tributes despite their tolerant attitudes, and graciously thanked the Capitol citizens for hosting Arbor and Isla, steering them away from the train platform and away to be taken to their accommodations quarters, while quietly congratulating them for making a strong effort to present a pleasant impression. Gallus and the Sevens met with the District 7 stylist, Jessica Peaseblossom, at their apartment. She was quick to remark that they looked so cute that she could just eat them up, startling the pair of tributes. They exchanged confused and wary looks, mouthing "crazy" to each other as Jessica showed Gallus the designs she had prepared for his mentees. Despite Jessica's bubbly attitude and fluttery voice, she had created some surprisingly down-to-earth costumes for the parade. Gallus and his tributes agreed that the outfits, made of intertwining ivy leaves wrapping around each other in elegant layers, were certainly contenders for best dressed, and they wore them with pride as their hair and makeup were done and they were sent down to the parade. The short period before the parade passed without incident this year, as did the parade itself. President Mace made his yearly speech accompanied by the customary cheers and celebration from the Capitol audience, while Rosalia selected District 11's coordinated outfits, a suit and dress fading from red to pink to imitate gala apples, as this year's best dressed. Words could not describe the expressions of disgust and contempt on the faces of Heifer and Madura as they looked down at their unsightly cow-cacao costumes, and the Capitol audience seemed to agree. In fact, several bouquets of flowers were thrown in their direction out of sheer sympathy for their unfortunate situation on public television. Arbor and Isla's costumes attracted interest from the crowd, especially compared to the lackluster train costumes from the District 6 tributes in the chariot in front of them. They received several roses and small flower bouquets, delighting them as they sniffed the contents during President Mace's speech. While the parade was not particularly interesting or filled with innovative outfits this year as had been expected for a quail year, the majority of the costumes were commended by Rosalia as being adequate and representative of their districts, which seemed to be her way of tactfully commenting on the pair from 10's costumes. At the end of the night, all tributes were brought back to their apartments. In ordinary years, mentors would immediately instruct tributes to get some rest for the night before training the next morning. However, due to this year's quail twist, each tribute would instead get to meet and interact with the animal companion that would accompany them in the training center and later, arena. 2 avoxes brought 2 identical crates into each apartment, containing one male mutt and another female mutt. Every single crate contained the same species of animal for the sake of fairness and as outlined in the quail twist itself. The 7s looked at each other with nervous anticipation as their avoxes entered with the crates, slowly setting them on the table and opening the fronts with gloved hands. The tributes peered in curiously, and 24 gasps echoed around the various apartments in the accommodations tower at the same time. A furry brown ball of fluff flew out of the female mutt crate in the District 7 apartment and attached itself to Isla's face, causing her to scream in surprise and fall backward. The male mutt crawled out and surveyed the room as cameras zoomed in to show all of Panem that the animal companions given to the tributes this year were none other than small, bushy-tailed, beady-eyed, trainable squirrel mutts. The mischievous creatures roamed the dining tables in search of food and scampered around the apartments, sending tributes, mentors, and stylists alike into a panicked frenzy. According to our sources, one squirrel nearly managed to flee the District 9 apartment via an air duct and had to be suctioned out by an avox with a powerful vacuum. Arbor cried out in alarm as his squirrel dived into a leftover salad bowl from dinner and emerged with a tomato on its head. Isla's squirrel had fallen off her face and onto her arm, and she appeared quite amused at its antics as it scurried around. Meanwhile, at the District 10 apartment, Madura was frantically chasing her squirrel around, as it had escaped and was gleefully exploring the apartment to its little heart's desire. Heifer's squirrel was getting intimate with a table leg, and had to be removed and recaged by the combined efforts of Heifer and Aeschylus, who both emerged from the carnage covered in scratches. While some tributes encountered more difficulty than others in restraining their respective squirrels, all of them eventually managed to successfully reinstall them in their cages for the night before going to bed. A few had sustained indignant claw scratches delivered by some of the more stubborn mutts, but most were uninjured. Many of the mentors encouraged their tributes to get some rest while they ensured the animals were fed and watered for the night, though a scuffle was heard in the hallway outside the District 1 apartment when it was discovered that the squirrels belonging to Alexander Nikolain's tributes had staged a prison break after he accidentally fell asleep while watching them, resulting in these squirrels liberating those belonging to Celia Barrett's tributes. Soon, they proceeded to the 3rd floor and liberated the squirrels that belonged to Lena Siragon's mentees, creating a veritable squirrel stampede that woke up several tributes. By the time it was discovered that the squirrels were rioting in the halls and attempting to flee the accommodations tower, a large crowd consisting of drowsy mentors, alarmed avoxes, and even a few bewildered peacekeepers found themselves pursuing the squirrels throughout the building armed with cages and nets. However, despite the humans' desperate attempts to recapture the mutinying creatures, they found no success. Austin and Lena exchanged tired looks as they hurried through the halls alongside Celia and Alexander, all 4 victors clearly embarrassed that they had been able to survive and win a Hunger Games, but could not perform the simple task of rounding up squirrels on the loose. Eventually, the squirrels were chased into a trainer's office on the ground floor, where they were barricaded in by the crowd of pursuers as they debated how to manage the situation. Just as they agreed to hold a vote on the best course of action to capture all of the squirrels, a disturbance was seen at the rear of the crowd and a figure pushed their way through. This turned out to be none other than Gloria Steele herself, dressed in an unflattering gray nightgown and fuzzy rabbit slippers. The only unusual aspect of her appearance was the large, dripping water cannon that she held in her arms, as she ordered avoxes and peacekeepers alike to move aside. Even the 4 victors parted to allow her through, clearly having seen firsthand how dangerous she could be with the water cannon. Gloria cracked her neck, kicked open the door, and fired a gushing jet of water straight into the mass of squirrels, sending them flying into the rear office wall and knocking them out. She turned around to see the shocked group behind her and grumbled that she did not like being awoken in the middle of the night, before storming off and presumably back to bed. This left the victors to marshal together a squirrel cleanup squad, which caged and returned all of the dazed squirrels back to the correct apartments without further incident. Despite the interruption of the previous night, training the next morning was started at the usual time, bright and early. Gloria Steele walked out this year with a sharper expression on her face than usual, causing Rosalia to speculate that she was extra tense and irritable over the presence of the tribute's assigned squirrels in the training area. In addition to the ordinary training stations, this year there were animal trainers scattered throughout the center. These trainers could advise tributes on handling their animal guides in the arena and provide some pointers on potential skills in which they could train their squirrels. Gloria had come prepared this time with a stun gun after the fight at the sword station the prior year, eyeing up the tributes with suspicion. While she was explaining the rules, the squirrel belonging to Kansai from 5 got a bit too curious and leaped onto her shoulder, causing her to let out a cry of fright and swat at the animal in disgust. Several tributes tried to stifle laughter as she fought to get the squirrel off her shoulder, but the laughter immediately ceased when Gloria brandished her stun gun and stunned the squirrel into submission. Many watched in breathless horror as the squirrel froze up and fell off her shoulder onto the ground, though Contour from 1 seemed excited and wondered aloud to his district partner, Jewel, if they could be sponsored a stun gun. Kansai winced and scurried forward to collect her twitching squirrel as Gloria brushed off the uncomfortable moment and shooed the tributes off to the training stations. Arbor and Isla knew that it was customary in the past few years for the 7s to work closely with the 4s, but they did not like the menacing way the 4s this year grinned at other tributes while stabbing tridents into the centers of targets. Instead, they skirted around from station to station together, taking comfort in the familiarity of the Axis station. Arbor had aptly named his squirrel Squirrely McSquirrelface, and actually seemed to quite enjoy teaching his squirrel to fetch nuts at the edible plant station, where an area had been set up for teaching the animals to retrieve nuts and berries. Isla's squirrel had been named Chippy, as she admired its sharp little front teeth and how it efficiently whittled away at the fake trees in the camouflage station. Compared to Arbor, she was having much greater success in training her squirrel, mostly because she had borrowed a few nuts from the edible plant station and was occasionally rewarding Chippy with the nuts. Arbor had just been yelling at his squirrel when it did not do what he wanted, resulting in Squirrely McSquirrelface running off a few times and forcing him to sprint across the training center after him. Heifer refused to even name his squirrel as he greatly disliked it, remarking to a trainer that he thought it was giving him a funny look in response whenever he looked at it, and grumpily remarking that it would be more useful if it were barbecued after it tried to bite him. Madura had named her squirrel Shirley Squirrely, and had curiously given Shirley one of the smaller knives at the knife station to see if the squirrel could wield it in defense. She expected that the squirrel would be overburdened by the knife and unable to hold it in its small claws, but she forgot that this was no ordinary squirrel. The mutts had been bred and engineered with much more strength, agility, intelligence, and speed than real squirrels, and Shirley easily clutched the knife between her tiny paws while cocking her head to the side, seemingly aiming it directly at Madura. She shrieked in fright at Shirley's beady gaze and stumbled backward, calling for a trainer to help disarm her squirrel. However, it was Heifer who lumbered over to her and plucked the knife from Shirley's paws, pinching it between his fingers in bemusement. He had apparently spent the morning refusing to train his disagreeable squirrel and instead working at the weight station, the axe station, and the sword station, earning the attention of a few of the careers. In fact, his squirrel was not even on his person, most of the time scampering unsupervised around the training center. He did happen to notice one time when it scurried out from under a table and tripped Contour from 1, causing him to shriek in fright and hide behind his district partner. Heifer let out a great booming laugh and for once seemed appreciative of his nameless squirrel, despite their mutual hatred. The 3 days of training passed in a manner that Rosalia described as the most chaotic she had seen since a hamster got loose at Lena Siragon's victory tour party. Squirrels frequently escaped their owners and had to be chased around the training center, while Mortran from 3 soon discovered he was allergic to his animal and could hardly be around it for 2 minutes before beginning to sneeze. Fortunately, over the course of the 3 days, as tributes became more proficient at controlling their squirrels and finding effective training methods, they soon became more docile and even quite talented at a variety of skills. Arbor had finally taken Isla's advice and had begun rewarding Squirrely McSquirrelface with treats to train him, eventually learning that Squirrely was an exceptionally talented helper. He managed to train Squirrely to chitter on command, though he seemed to have no idea of how this would help in the arena. Isla had even more success, managing to get Chippy to come to her on command and store small items in her paws and cheek pouches. Madura struggled with controlling Shirley Squirrely, especially after her traumatic incident earlier involving Shirley possessing a knife. She ended up focusing more on working at the survival stations than training Shirley, and continued to have some issues with Shirley running off on the third day of training. Heifer had continued to ignore his unnamed squirrel, who had been left to his own devices. Ironically, this strategy had almost seemed to work in Heifer's favor, as his squirrel did not cause any further training disruptions after the incident on the first day, and could usually be found napping in a corner. Some tributes had trained their squirrels on more unique skills than others. The careers enjoyed training theirs to fight each other with small weapons, until Gloria stepped in and said that this was not permitted in case the squirrels caused each other actual injury before the games. Game maker evaluations also occurred in a slightly different manner due to the quell twist. Tributes were only allocated 5 minutes instead of the usual 10 to showcase their own skills, with the other 5 being allocated to showing the skills they had taught their squirrels. Arbor threw a few smaller axes around and demonstrated to the game makers that Squirrely McSquirrelface could chitter and come to him on command, earning small nods of approval. Isla was slightly clumsier with an axe, but her demonstration of Chippy's extensive new retrieval and food identification talents distinguished her from several other outlier tributes. Heifer did not have much to show during his squirrel talent portion, as his squirrel simply napped in the center of the room, but he did so well with handling some cleavers and throwing around some heavy weights that the game makers were nevertheless impressed. Madura performed poorly overall, clearly showing some nerves from the moment she entered the room and failing to demonstrate that Shirley Squirrely had learned many relevant skills, though she impressed the game makers with her remarkable speed after proving that she could run a lap around the room in only a matter of seconds. The game makers consulted and finally scored the tributes based on a combination of their personal skills and those of their assigned squirrel companions. Leading the pack for the first time ever were all non-careers, as the careers had wasted the time when they could have been training their squirrels and instead had them fighting gladiator style. Isla from 7 tied with Sorghum from 9 and Thorn from 11 with a score of 9, all three having both demonstrated sufficient skills and excellent squirrel training. Cuna from 6, Arbor from 7, and Heifer from 10 followed closely behind with a tied score of 8. At the opposite end were Mortran from 3 and Madura from 10 after their poor performances for the game makers. Aeschylus congratulated Heifer, but berated Madura and told her that she needed to train her squirrel better before the games began, while Gallus congratulated both of his tributes and seemed especially proud that they had both been among the top scorers in the group this year. That night, Madura attempted to train Shirley some more, but this did not end well, and Shirley nearly escaped onto the balcony. Heifer had a brief discussion with Aeschylus that appeared to be intense and engaged, though it was impossible to hear over the sounds of a shrieking Madura chasing her squirrel around their apartment. In the District 7 apartment, Isla paced around worriedly and recited her answers to potential interview questions, occasionally being barked at by Gallus to fix her posture or speak more slowly. Arbor picked his teeth with a sewing needle left behind by their stylist and appeared lazily uninterested in his district partner's activities, although it seemed as though he were deep in thought about something and absent-mindedly rubbing the scar on his arm. All tributes prepared the next day for their interviews, reciting answers and learning proper etiquette from their mentors. That evening, Rosalia arrived to the studio in a long green gown, apparently made out of some kind of field turf. After several unremarkable interviews had passed, she welcomed in Isla for her turn. The girl from 7 arrived in a deep green dress that appeared to have a sash down the front script from a real leaf. Rosalia asked her a few light questions about her home life and preparations for the games before moving on. She then asked Isla how her relation to a past tribute, Lila Panem, District 7 tribute from the 94th Games in the second incarnation, had affected her along her journey to this point, and Isla calmly responded that she knew of all the mistakes her great-aunt had made in the arena and would be sure not to make the same choices, joking that the girl from 1 did not look too appealing as an ally this time around. The audience laughed in response to this, and Isla was received generally well overall, smiling with poise and thanking Rosalia for granting her the opportunity to make her case to the Capitol. She was followed by her district partner, Arbor, who took the stage in a deep green suit with a matching leaf sash. Arbor was a bit awkward in his interview as he tried to come off as carefree and tough, casually moving his sleeve to show off his various scars and injuries, although Rosalia dotingly declared him to be adorkable. Indeed, it appeared that he seemed to have developed a small crush on the married interviewer. He shyly answered all of the questions asked, but appeared flustered when Rosalia brought up that he had only been marginally successful in training his squirrel. As the Capitol audience chuckled at her good-natured jokes, he flushed bright red with embarrassment, and Rosalia tried to get his attention to no avail, moving on to the next tribute a few minutes later. After a few more interviews, Madura was brought on stage in a deep brown satin dress and large brown platform heels, reminiscent of District 10's cacao powder. She appeared to be just as, if not even more, frightened than Arbor by the prospect of interviewing with the legendary Rosalia. After a few minutes, the crowd warmed to her shy nature and eager responses to all of Rosalia's questions about her family and plans for the games. It certainly seemed as though Madura's sweetness and refusal to speak poorly of other tributes had paid off, as the crowd kindly applauded her at the conclusion of her interview, and she happily accepted several bouquets of flowers as she tottered off the stage in her oversized heels. Heifer was escorted on after Madura, wearing a tailored dark brown suit to match Madura's dress, and was jokingly branded a beefcake by Rosalia, referencing his muscles and his district. However, he appeared irritated with this label and was disagreeable throughout the interview, growing even more annoyed when Rosalia pointed out his lack of preparation in training his squirrel and had to be removed from the stage after telling Rosalia that she looked more like a squirrel than his mutt companion. At last, a few interviews later, Rosalia excitedly welcomed head game maker Marin out to the stage. They were dressed in a sharp black pantsuit with a pure white boutonniere that appeared textured to have small indentations in the flower petals. In anticipation of this quinquennial quell, head game maker Marin promised to divulge one secret clue about the upcoming arena during the interview. Capital TV showed the selected image to the crowd as they began to buzz with curiosity and speculation. It showed a 3-striped box, with one stripe apparently containing sand, another apparently containing water, and a third apparently containing grass or turf. In fact, the audience had become so loud with discussion and speculation amongst themselves at this point that it quickly became impossible for Rosalia to conduct the actual interview over the buzz of interest. Since most of the capital population in the audience was no longer paying attention to the interview being conducted right in front of them, Rosalia made the executive decision to thank head game maker Marin for their time and conclude the interview early, as there was no chance of getting anyone to settle down. Head game maker Marin departed the stage area rather awkwardly, but still smiling at the stir they had created in the crowd, and Rosalia signed off for the night shortly afterward. The rest of the night passed without event, and morning dawned upon the nervous tributes. Aeschylus and Gallus both wished their respective mentees luck in the arena, as the tributes dressed in their arena gear for this year, although Aeschylus could be heard under his breath muttering, "If you make it past the first day," when wishing Madura luck. The outfits for this year were seen to be polo shirts with flat white sneakers for all tributes, with male tributes receiving breathable shorts and female tributes breathable skirts. Isla complained to her mentor that the outfits were unfairly designed so male tributes did not have to worry about exposing themselves to all of Panem when running, but Rosalia explained that head game maker Marin had mentioned in their unbroadcasted interview that the outfits were supposed to be on theme rather than practical, which Gallus also explained to his angry mentee. All tributes also received a white baseball cap, which they placed on their heads and seemed confused as to how these would help in the arena. Each tribute was presented with the crate containing their respective squirrel and instructed to place their squirrels on their shoulders once they were inside the launch tube. Arbor's companion, Squirrely McSquirrelface, almost made a break for the door to the launch room, but was quickly retrieved by Gallus before he could escape. The tributes took one final deep breath before placing the squirrels on their shoulders, stepping into their tubes, and being raised up into the arena. The tributes goggled at the breathtakingly luxurious arena, a sprawling country club with an expansive golf course. The clubhouse itself was situated at the center of the arena, surrounded directly by several golf course waterfronts and golf greens. This country club appeared to contain a restaurant, tennis courts, a large swimming pool with a diving board, and several miscellaneous patios and walking paths to direct visitors from place to place. The cornucopia was located in the center of the first golf hole and contained a variety of food, water, and medical supplies, as well as some food for squirrel companions. However, the only weapons in the arena were reinforced golf clubs sharpened to a deadly point at the end so that they resembled halberds, which could only be obtained from the inside of the cornucopia or at a golf supply stand near the front of the clubhouse. Many tributes glanced down at their outfits as if suddenly understanding at this time why they had been chosen as the uniforms, seemingly appreciative that the outfits were breathable and light-colored in the warm weather and that the hats could protect them from the broad sunlight. Most also stuffed their squirrel companions in their shirt, skirt, or pants pockets to keep them safe but portable and allow for more efficient travel. As soon as the countdown ended, about half the tributes sprinted inward, while the other half scattered across the various green spaces and waterfronts surrounding the central hole. Isla sprinted in toward the cornucopia, ponytail flying, with Chippy sitting on her shoulder and hanging onto her shirt. She glanced around for a moment, watching the careers bashing the boy from 8 to death with several deadly golf clubs, and quickly assessed the situation. As both Isla and viewers looked around at the cornucopia chaos, most tributes seemed to be paying attention to more pressing matters than herself, so she seized a spare golf club, 3 soup cans, and a bottle of water before running away. Behind her, the girl from 15 was brutally battered to death with golf clubs by the pair from 4, spooking Isla and causing her to run faster. Arbor struggled considerably more than his district partner to find his footing and repeatedly tripped on the uneven golf green, although Squirrely McSquirrelface assisted him, chittering urgently to indicate that he was being targeted by the careers as Paladin from 5 was drowned in an artificial lake by them nearby. He nodded and ducked under several battling tributes to avoid the multitude of clashes happening around him with the sharpened golf clubs. The fours were seen to turn on each other, with the boy turning around and stabbing the girl through the neck while she was about to kill the girl from 3, whom he also killed a moment later. Madura skittered away from the cornucopia amid this chaos, clutching a single soup can and with Shirley Squirrely hanging onto her braid, only looking back in time to see the very same boy from 4 taken down by the pair from 1. Heifer barreled towards the cornucopia, knocking aside several smaller tributes in the process. Elbowing Corset from 8 aside, he was too focused on getting a golf club and some food to realize that she had been attacked and bludgeoned to death behind him by the careers. He snatched a golf club from Akil from 15 and bonked him on the head with its stick for good measure before stuffing a water bottle and some food into his pants. Heifer froze for a moment as he watched the body of the girl from 11 go flying past him with a golf club embedded in her back, observing that the bloodbath was almost over and he was at the cornucopia with a group of armed careers. He slowly turned around to see Contour, Jewel, and Adora from 2 grinning wickedly and wiggling their fingers on their lethal golf clubs. However, Rufus from 2 held them back, stepping forward and sizing Heifer up. He declared the boy strong enough to be their bodyguard, a fact which took Heifer aback, but from which he quickly recovered a moment later. Apparently seeing no other choice than to agree to work with them or meet his end at the hands of several sharp and painful golf clubs, Heifer shook Rufus's hand and hesitantly joined the career pack, though his nameless squirrel companion had slept in his pocket throughout the entire bloodbath and did not seem to be invested in assisting its owner in any way. Arbor made his way into the country club, which he knew was crawling with tributes but which provided many hiding places nonetheless. He had heard tribute footsteps out by the pool area and poolside restaurant while entering, so he settled safely inside the lobby and crouched behind the reception desk. Throughout the afternoon and evening, as he tried to cover his rumbling stomach, he heard the whispering voices and thudding footsteps of various other tributes as they traversed the area, though he remained hidden and barricaded himself into his hiding place. Madura had scampered away from the bloodbath and nestled herself in a sand bunker some 100 yards from the cornucopia, hiding under cover of the indented bank and trying to soothe the nervously chittering Shirley McSquirrely. She had only managed to pick up a single can of clam chowder soup that had fallen out of a tribute's arms ahead of her when running, though she was too hungry at this point in the afternoon to resist cracking it open and allowing herself a sip. She heard voices nearby, but noticed that it was just Sorghum and Pasta from 9, sitting on the banks of the nearby artificial lake and taking inventory of what they had retrieved from the cornucopia. Madura began to shiver as the sun slowly sank in the sky, although it was almost certainly from nerves, as the arena was quite warm and mild with only a light breeze from the waterfronts. Isla had quickly scaled a palm tree near the cornucopia to avoid being caught by the careers upon realizing that they had dispatched most tributes at the bloodbath and perched herself at the top amid the palm leaves. Chippy diligently laid her golf club down on Isla's lap, chittering happily as Isla fed her a small piece of a plum from the lamb stew in one of her soup cans. For the remainder of the afternoon and evening, they kept a careful watch over the arena, and Isla fashioned herself a makeshift blanket out of one of the palm fronds. She tickled Chippy with one of the tips, jokingly calling Chippy her best frond, as they ate some of her stew together and rested for the evening. Because of the spaciousness of this arena, few tributes or alliances encountered each other for the rest of the night. The anthem of Panem played as the portraits of the girl from 3, both tributes from 4, Paladin from 5, the boy from 8, Corset from 8, the girl from 11, and the girl from 15 were shown in the sky. Heifer watched this with an impassive expression, settled comfortably at the career camp near the cornucopia on a rotating sleep shift. He appeared alert and slightly jumpy as he left the waterfront to swap shifts with Contour, his eyes hooded with shadow in the sunset. Madura felt more comfortable to roam around as evening fell, sensing that even the careers did not have any advantages in the darkness. She carefully picked her way out of the sand bunker and around the edges of the lake, where she crossed over to find a bridge between the cornucopia and the country club. Apparently debating returning to her previous campsite or finding somewhere more strategic to settle, her eyes lit up in the sunset sky as she scurried down and quietly settled under the bridge, tucking her socks and shoes on the bank and wading waist deep into the water with Shirley nestled on her shoulder. This new location under the bridge afforded her the opportunity to closely monitor the flow of tributes through the area and even listen in on conversations without being detected, something of which she was clearly quite proud. At night, Arbor ventured out from behind the front desk and he freely explored around the quiet country club, cloaked in the comfort of the twinkling night sky. Most spaces were free of tributes, as they had just been passing through earlier in the day to scope out the area and were not staying in the clubhouse overnight. As he walked out into the swimming pool area, Squirrely McSquirrelface perched on his shoulder. He failed to notice a figure hiding behind a poolside table obscured by shadow. He passed by the tables and headed to the very edge of the restaurant, where a small beverage cooler was located. Eager for some refreshment after the warm day and his exertion at the bloodbath, Arbor opened the cooler and cracked open a bottle of lemon iced tea. However, he had hardly taken a single sip when he was whacked in the head from behind by a small figure trying to wield a much too large pool umbrella, leaving a gash across the base of his neck. Rubbing the injured area in surprise and indignation, he turned to see Mortran from 3 rearing back, about to charge with the pool umbrella again. Arbor jumped back just in time and hurled the open iced tea bottle as hard as he could at Mortran. It smacked him in the face, spraying iced tea everywhere and forcing him to drop the pool umbrella. On top of this, Squirrely McSquirrelface leaped out at Mortran and caused him to grunt in pain as he clawed at his face. Arbor realized that the glass bottle had broken when it ricocheted off the boy onto the ground and picked up the dangerously sharp top half from the floor before seizing Mortran by the shirt. Shoving him backwards at the pool, he brandished the cracked bottle and sharply smashed it against Mortran's head repeatedly until he began to pass out of consciousness. Searching around for a more efficient way to kill his attacker, he realized in a moment that the pool was directly in front of them and threw the unconscious boy from 3/4 into its murky depths. Due to Mortran's lack of consciousness, he drowned within the minute and his cannon sounded. A hovercraft silently dipped into the pool to retrieve his body as Arbor stood back and breathed heavily. The hovercraft also collected the deceased tribute's squirrel, although in the darkness it was not clear what was done with the animal. Arbor and Squirrely McSquirrelface scurried back to the reception desk with the remaining iced tea and half a broken bottle, as well as a small basket of tater tots he had seen sitting out on a table on the way back. They settled down and slept soundly through the morning, exhausted after their tiring night and relieved at the outcome of their close call with Mortran. Meanwhile, perched in her treetop, Isla was awoken in the middle of the night by Chippy, who clawed frantically at her cheek to alert her to a disturbance. As she blearily opened her eyes, she nearly screamed, noticing the pair of careers on guard duty below her, who had been peering up at her hiding place and snickering. Evidently, her snores while asleep had drawn the attention of Contour from 1 and Adora from 2, who had moved over to investigate the noise and had started laughing upon noticing it was coming from a tribute in a tree. Isla packed and gathered up her possessions as quickly as possible, while the careers loudly debated the best way to kill a tribute up in a tree, trading suggestions and deciding that they could possibly attempt to fell the thin palm tree with the combined hacking of their golf clubs. Casting around for some way out of this precarious situation, Isla scanned the area with a degree of worry, her breaths shallow and fearful. Chippy chittered in her ear and suddenly turned, wiggling her rear end and leaping from the palm tree over to a different tree. Isla's face scrunched up and tears began to spill down her cheeks as she seemed to realize that even Chippy had abandoned her to her fate. She peered back down, only to find the careers gleefully making a sport out of digging their golf clubs into the base of her tree, and buried her face in her hands with resignation amid their rough laughter. Yet as she wept and clutched onto the swaying tree for dear life, she heard a faint chittering once again and slowly looked up to see Chippy inclining her head while perched on the frond of another palm tree nearby, close enough that she could almost reach out and touch her squirrel friend. Having a realization, Isla suddenly grinned and tossed each of her food cans in succession onto the top of this tree, where they landed squarely behind Chippy. Glancing down at the preoccupied careers to make sure she was not their primary focus, she passed her golf club across the gap between the trees to Chippy, who clutched it in her tiny claws and patiently waited on the palm frond. Isla then looked back at the careers, who were just about to deliver the death blow to her tree hideout, summoned her courage and district knowledge, and leaped across the divide, bracing herself for a painful impact with the ground or the tree trunk. However, to her amazement and relief, she landed safely in the center of the palm fronds on the other tree, causing Chippy to chitter excitedly and scamper around in circles for a moment. The girl and her squirrel watched with amusement as the careers downed the original tree, only to find that there was no terrified tribute begging for her life within its canopy. Isla continued to stifle her laughter as Contour and Adora began to argue, with Adora demanding to know where she had gone and how she could have escaped when they were right below the tree the entire time. Contour insisted that they had failed to catch Isla because Adora had been talking too much and distracting him, which resulted in a furious Adora rapping him across the head with the non-lethal end of her golf club in indignation. Their argument had awoken their district partners and Heifer, who arrived moments later, still yawning and stretching, to sort out the trouble and relieve the duo of their guard duty. Fortunately for the quarreling careers, the prospect of getting some rest seemed to be more important than continuing their dispute, and they headed off to the career camp in the center of the green to sleep, while Jewel, Rufus, and Heifer settled below Isla's tree to keep an eye on their surroundings, though these three appeared too tired to pay attention to why their allies had just cut down a tree, or the fact that a tribute was hiding right above them. The rest of the night passed without incident, only punctuated by the quiet burbling of the fountains in the artificial lake. All those remaining in the arena peacefully awoke the following morning to a sunny day with a few soft clouds dotting the sky. At this point, many tributes who had not managed to secure food the past day were starting to become irritable and impatient to find food, and Rosalia remarked that hungry tributes were always a recipe for trouble. It is the Hunger Games, after all, on her morning commentary. As the sun rose over the country club, the cameras uncovered no less than 5 tributes hiding in various areas around the restaurant and the pool area nearby. Cuna from 6, Sorghum and Pasta from 9, Thorn from 11, and Akil from 15 had all hidden in this part of the clubhouse and were eyeing up the food in the restaurant kitchen and main dining room. At the crack of dawn, Thorn was the first to make a move. Sprinting up from his hiding place under a dining table and into the kitchen, he snatched a meat cleaver and broke into the kitchen refrigerator. After loading his arms with fruit salad, 2 BLT sandwiches, and frozen mozzarella sticks, he darted back out of the kitchen. However, in the entryway back to the restaurant, he encountered a large problem. Sorghum and Pasta, the pair from 9, had grabbed steak knives from the dining room and were raiding a moving cart full of water glasses, small portions of lasagna, and several strawberry shortcakes. The trio came face to face as Thorn dashed out of the kitchen, almost dropping his food in alarm. Before they could even react to each other's presence, they heard a faint crash from behind them and realized Cuna had just knocked a plate off a table by accident. The three all turned to see her sheepishly clutching 2 lemon meringue pies in her hands, preparing to throw them. Armed with a crown roast and a pitcher of fruit punch, Akil was seen walking out of the rear food storage room and soon witnessed the carnage about to ensue. Grinning and raising the crown roast and pitcher up high, he roared and charged into the fray, engaging several other tributes in culinary warfare. Cuna hurled one of her lemon meringue pies at Akil, who dodged it and accidentally splashed fruit punch on Thorn nearby, which splattered Thorn's crisp white tribute shirt in sticky red splotches. Sorghum and Pasta fired lasagna in all directions from their position, creating a messy rainbow display on the restaurant walls whenever they missed their targets. Cuna ducked for cover behind the bar in the corner as Akil pulled a rib bone from the crown roast and hurled it at Sorghum. During this whole spectacle, with food flying everywhere, dishes crashing against walls, and tributes ducking for cover, the tribute squirrels were running around in panic and creating more disorder by tracking food all over the floors. Thorn clamped 2 pieces of bread on either side of Akil's head and declared him to be an idiot sandwich, as Akil wrenched away and began trying to stab him with the rib bones from the crown roast. At last, the food fight had its first fatality when Thorn managed to get close enough to Pasta from behind to slice a meat cleaver into her head, causing her to crumple and sounding her cannon. He retrieved the cleaver and fled the scene soon afterward, having only managed to take a single BLT and a few frozen mozzarella sticks that had survived the carnage with him. Sorghum fled the scene atop a rolling cart after watching his district partner taken down right in front of him. This left Akil and Cuna to square off, and Cuna wasted no time, making the first move by stepping forward from her hiding place to boldly pie Akil in the face with her remaining lemon meringue pie, smearing whipped cream and lemon custard all over his face. He cried out in rage and grabbed the steak knife that had formerly belonged to Pasta, hurriedly licking pie off his face to chase after Cuna. Unfortunately for her, even with limited visibility due to the whipped cream smeared on his face, Akil quickly tracked her down and stabbed her through the neck. He then ran off with his squirrel in tow, hoping to avoid anyone who might have been drawn to the commotion created by the food fight. Meanwhile, an entirely different spectacle was occurring down by the artificial lake. As the bewildered careers watched, accompanied by all the other tributes hiding in the area, Kansai from 5 was wandering around aimlessly near some of the golf holes at the water's edge, right next to the career camp. She seemed to have been quite intoxicated, holding a beer bottle she had snuck in and seized from the restaurant during the chaos of the food fight, and whistling a merry tune as she walked. The careers and Heifer looked at each other in confusion, wondering if Kansai was trying to trap them by acting so brazen in front of half the arena. However, as they watched, Kansai blew a kiss to the sky and invited the careers to come closer. Rufus and Adora hesitantly did so, hands on their weapons and regarding Kansai suspiciously, while Contour, Jewel, and Heifer stayed back at their camp. Suddenly, she turned and began to run away the moment they approached her location. Kansai waved as the couriers began to chase her and giggled, leading them on a wild goose chase all across the artificial lake to other tributes' amusement. Just as Rufus and Adora finally closed in on her with exasperation and annoyance painted all over their faces, Kansai accidentally slipped and fell backward into the artificial lake, a few bubbles surfacing as she slowly drowned. Her cannon sounded a moment later. Many tributes were startled by this display, while Rosalia remarked that it seemed Kansai's Hunger Games philosophy was that she was there for a good time, not a long time. Madura watched the spectacle from her hideout, poking her head out just in time to watch Kansai trip into the lake, though she hurriedly ducked back down when she believed Jewel had almost seen her. She grinned at Shirley Squirrely and commented that it was because of events like Kansai's drunken dive that she would never drink alcohol, to which her squirrel chittered in agreement and made a gesture that could be interpreted as a thumbs down. Isla was comfortably nestled in her palm tree with an excellent view out over the arena and had watched the Kansai scene with a mixture of curiosity and revulsion. Despite her distance from the incident, she appeared nervous about the possibility of being noticed from afar and quietly remarked to Chippy that they would probably need to leave their camp soon to avoid being spotted and trapped up in the tree again by the couriers, especially after the events of the previous night. Despite their efforts during the day to scout a new location, the presence of the Career Alliance below the tree seemed to worry her to the point where she decided to finish off another one of her soup cans and settle down for an afternoon nap to avoid thinking about it, as Chippy curled up on her shoulder and kept one eye open. The afternoon passed lazily, with few notable events occurring unless one counted Heifer failing to teach his squirrel how to chitter the alphabet in front of the other careers as quality entertainment. Once again, an eventful day turned into a quiet evening. Few tributes were encouraged to raid the career camp by the sheer size of their alliance and weapons stockpile, thereby avoiding any incidences of sabotage like the kind that had been perpetuated by District 5 victor Austin Clark during the 103rd Games. Arbor, Madura, and Isla all lay in wait within their respective hideouts and kept diligent track of the small bits of information they were able to pick up from observing other tributes in the landscape. However, some of the careers made a notable discovery when exploring the front of the clubhouse during the evening, a 6-person golf cart. It was an electricity-powered cart and was uncharged, meaning they could not use it at the moment, but they eagerly brought the golf cart and its included charger back to the campsite. Heifer was tasked with charging the cart and figuring out how it worked, as the careers decided that it would be best for him to drive them around so they could cover more ground when looking for tributes in the future, and even potentially run some over, an idea which seemed to appeal to Contour the most. Arbor continued to explore the country club, returning ever so often to his reception desk camp. One of the places he seemed to find the most interesting was the tennis court area. Arbor poked his head into various sheds and equipment storage facilities, ignoring the setting sun in favor of his own pursuits. With glee, he located some tennis rackets in the corner of one of the courts and grabbed one, taking a few test swings out of curiosity even though he did not know how to play and was unfamiliar with the sport. However, by far his greatest find was a tennis ball machine, filled to the brim with electric yellow tennis balls. He appeared interested in how to make it work, but struggled with finding the power button. After a few minutes of trying to find it, he gave up and began to casually bounce a single tennis ball around on his racket in boredom and hit it against a wall, as if waiting for an opponent. When the sun finally went down for the night and most tributes were beginning their sleeping shifts or eating a late dinner, Arbor decided it was time to head back in from his solitary tennis match. Just as he was setting the tennis racket back down in the corner, he heard a soft click from behind him and a pair of large, strong hands wrenching his arms behind his back. Arbor cried out in fright and whirled around, trying to see his attacker, before he realized that there were instead 2 attackers. After their brawl in the restaurant that morning, Thorn from 11 and Akil from 15 had encountered each other again and had decided to ally rather than fight for a second time that day. Thorn dragged Arbor to the edge of the court and held a meat cleaver to his throat, cocking his head and demanding to know if the boy had any supplies and where to find them, while Akil held his hands behind his back. Trembling, Arbor agreed to lead the 2 larger boys to the location of his campsite at the reception desk, though he did not comment on his own lack of supplies to them. It appeared as though he had been trying to signal to his squirrel to retrieve his broken bottle weapon from the camp, but Squirrely McSquirrelface failed to understand his owner's command and skittered worriedly alongside the group. As the 3 boys approached the reception desk, Thorn stepped over to examine the area, eyes narrowed. Finding there to be nothing of note, he glowered and turned to Akil, murmuring something in a language which could not be identified at the time, but which we now know to be the ancient language known as Louisiana Creole from the time before. Akil appeared to understand this and nodded, before both boys slowly turned to their captive. Each of them taking one of the worried Arbor's arms, they slammed him into the wall, as Thorn glared into his eyes and stated in a low tone that they would allow him to work with them as long as he did not complain and assisted them, citing his physical strength as an asset to them for the time being. Staring back with a mixed expression of apprehension and defiance, Arbor reluctantly nodded, and the trio moved upstairs, where they found and rested in an unused meeting room for the night, though an uneasy tension hung in the air between the two boys and their new ally. The portraits of Mortran from 3, Kansai from 5, Kuna from 6, and Pasta from 9 were shown in the sky. The following morning, the tributes awoke to find that the atmosphere in the arena was unusually quiet. It was a cloudier day outside than the past 2 days, and few had any inclinations to venture far from their campsites. Heifer continued serving as a bodyguard and assistant to the careers, dutifully tending to their small fire, studying the mechanisms of the golf cart, and drop-kicking his squirrel out of the camp when it tried to sneak off with some of their food. Despite this, he rarely joined in on their conversations and responded to their questions and comments by grunting. Isla polished off the last of her soup, which she had been trying to make last as long as possible, and fed Chippy the dregs at the bottom of her final can. She continued planning for a new place to make camp, gazing out over the arena and trying to guess the likely locations of the remaining tributes. Madura had a close call in the morning, as she was nearly spotted by the careers while they bathed nearby at the lake. Fortunately for her, they ignored the bridge and returned to their camp. She briefly considered trying to find a hiding place within the lake that was closer to the career camp to spy on them, but then recalled she did not know how to swim and decided against it. Madura used the tranquil morning and some leftover clams from her soup can to attempt to train Shirley Squirrely to bring her small items. However, Shirley ate the clams that were intended to be used as retrieving objects, and she soon gave up. Isla continued observing the arena and preparing herself for an afternoon expedition to the clubhouse, where she hoped to replenish her dwindling food and water supply, though she succeeded in sending Chippy out to the clubhouse in the morning to sneak away a small paper-to-go bag of onion rings, which she hungrily devoured along with the rest of her soup. She also practiced swinging around her golf club halberd, which she apparently expected to work in a similar way to an axe, though she nearly overbalanced and almost fell out of the tree upon discovering that it was much lighter and more aerodynamic than an axe. Despite all of the remaining tributes' serene mornings, there was a strange and slightly cold wind blowing through the arena that did not feel like the breezes from the first 2 days, almost as if it did not come from within the arena itself. Suddenly, to the complete shock of all of the remaining tributes, there was a massive explosion that came from what appeared to be outside the arena limits, beyond the far grove of trees at the golf course's edge, and an electric hum in the air that caused their hair to stand on end. This was soon followed by the sounds of rapid gunfire, causing several tributes, including Madura and Isla, to scream and cover their ears. At once, a gigantic image flickered into existence in the sky. Those watching from the windows in the country club and outside looked around in fear, clearly wondering what was happening, while the careers and Heifer readied their weapons and seemed concerned that something had been attacked or hijacked. The image that flickered into the sky was that of President Mace, making a special report from his office desk with perfectly coiffed magenta hair and perfectly crisp books sitting in a neatly arranged stack on his desk. He announced to the tributes that there had been an unexpected security breach in the arena, explaining that one tribute, Casper from 6, had blatantly abused the honor of the Quell Twist for this year, using the training time to covertly and illicitly train his squirrel to find weak points in force fields, including that of the actual arena. As a result of this breach, Casper had successfully removed his tracker, used his squirrel to navigate, and escaped the arena through an imperfection in the force field. According to President Mace, courtesy of the Capitol's excellent security forces and quick-thinking game maker team, Casper had been located and apprehended several hundred yards from the arena, while the breach had been immediately repaired. He calmly added that force field breaches would no longer be possible in the future, as the Capitol would be taking on additional technical personnel to supervise force field maintenance during each games. In the meantime, as the situation was handled, all tributes were to shelter in place until further notice under penalty of tracker detonation. Heifer and the careers exchanged confused glances, laying down their weapons and sitting down on the turf with their heads together to discuss what could be happening and why they needed to stay put. While the careers appeared curious, Heifer appeared on edge and did not share in their speculations, clenching and unclenching a fist as his jaw muscle tensed. At one point, it appeared as if he were about to retort when Contour declared that Casper deserved the worst and was a filthy cheater, though he stopped himself. Isla clutched Chippy to her nervously, worrying about the repercussions of this disturbance, while Madura began to cry, upset and scared from both the ominous weather and President Mace's announcement. After several uncomfortable minutes, footage was once again broadcast into the cloudy sky. Yet this time, it was not of President Mace giving a briefing, but rather of a smooth marble room somewhere in the Capitol. Two peacekeepers dragged in a beaten and bloodied body with a bag over its head, hardly identifiable as the tribute formerly known as Casper Myers of District 6. As the tributes watched in horror and revulsion, several dozen peacekeepers entered the room armed with gleaming machine guns. The pair of guards ripped the bag off Casper's head, revealing two black eyes and heavily swollen cheeks. He hardly appeared human anymore, let alone the same boy who had entered the arena 3 days earlier. After a brief reading of Casper's treasonous crimes against Panem by one of the guards present, the gloved and helmeted peacekeepers all raised their weapons and aimed them directly at Casper, who was barely able to stand at this point and had been dragged to the red X marked in the center of the floor. A peacekeeper in the rear calmly called out, 3, 2, 1, fire. And the peacekeepers riddled him and the blank walls behind him with bullet holes, causing him to collapse to the floor in a heap as the white walls and floors were painted red with his blood. Peacekeepers then carried in a wooden coffin, which had clearly been intended to carry out a dead tribute from the arena, and tossed his lifeless body inside before removing it from the ravaged room. The image flickered off as the tributes watched in horror and faded back to President Mace, still sitting at his polished desk with a stern expression, identical to that of a parent having reprimanded a misbehaving child. The next footage shown was that of Casper's entire extended family in District 6 being rounded up by peacekeepers and executed by firing squad in front of the rest of the district, their bodies thudding against the cold concrete floor and carted away by more peacekeepers, a clear demonstration of what would happen should any other tributes get ideas from this grave occurrence. The image flickered off as the tributes watched in horror and once again faded back to President Mace, still sitting and regarding them coolly. Without batting an eye, he calmly reminded the tributes that this was the fate of those who sought to subvert the games, as a screen behind him showed a peacekeeper putting a bullet in the head of Casper's squirrel, its brown fur blooming with deep red. Lastly, President Mace reminded them of the Panem motto, Panem today, Panem tomorrow, Panem forever, and slowly faded away. For the rest of the day, tributes cowered at their respective camps, shaken by the footage they had just seen broadcasted in the arena and all around Panem. The portrait of Casper from 6 was shown in the night sky, an ashy-faced boy with a serious frown, almost unrecognizable from the raw and beaten body riddled with holes that they had seen earlier in the afternoon. The entire arena was painfully silent all night, a sharp contrast from the gentle peace that had blanketed the space in the morning. As the next morning dawned, a shaking voice was heard over the arena sounding rather forced, as if someone were holding a gun to the speaker's head. This voice belonged to head game maker Marin, who half-heartedly declared that in 5 minutes' time, a hurricane would sweep through the arena and kill any tributes who were not within 200 feet of the cornucopia at that time. Upon the conclusion of the announcement, dark swirls of clouds began to accumulate in the smaller lakes at the edges of the country club grounds. Heifer and the careers were protected from this as they had camped out right at the cornucopia, while Isla's tree was also positioned close enough to the center that she remained unaffected as the brewing storm consolidated into one very terrifying cyclone. Thorn, Akil, and Arbor made their way from the clubhouse to the central part of the arena, helping each other through the burgeoning winds as their squirrels hung onto their shirts and successfully reaching the edges of the central waterfront. Sorghum stumbled towards the center from one of the farther golf greens, clutching his squirrel to his chest to guard it from the wind. However, as the 5-minute mark closed in, he tripped and fell, his foot becoming lodged in one of the golf holes. As Sorghum cried out in fear, the hurricane whirled closer and mercilessly whipped him up into its depths, sounding his cannon. Madura skittered out of her hiding place with Shirley in tow and paddled over to the safety of a sand bunker at the edge of the central fairway, appearing queasy just as she had been on the train, though this time it seemed to be with nerves about dying rather than the quell twist. She collapsed in the sand and clutched a hand to her stomach, vomiting once again over into the artificial lake, to the disgust of many viewers and Rosalia, who asked in alarm if the arena happened to have any spare pool filters to fish that out of there. The looming storm continued to whirl around the edges of the palm tree lines surrounding the waterfront, though as the 5-minute mark had passed and all the remaining tributes were within 200 feet of the cornucopia, it was forced to dissipate. An awkward tension hung around the remaining tributes, who seemed to both wish for the games to be concluded already and understood that there were several other people blocking them from achieving this goal. Isla, perched in her tree, had an excellent view of the locations of the other tributes, Heifer and the careers huddling in the center of the cornucopia green, Madura crouched on a sand bunker, and the 3 outlier boys positioned just behind some large trees at the edge of the lake. Just as she quietly whispered to Chippy that it would be best to dismount the tree and watch the action from a closer perspective, the career lines broke from their huddle and raised their golf clubs in unison. They sprinted towards the edge of the lake, where it appeared that Akil had accidentally given away the position of the three outlier boys due to his foot sticking out from behind a tree trunk. The three boys uttered a series of curses as they noticed the approaching careers and sprinted out from behind the trees. Suddenly, there was a disturbance as the careers stumbled upon Madura in the sand bunker on their way, leaning over the side of the bank and into the water. Adora raised an eyebrow at the unexpected encounter and leveled her golf club at the small girl from behind, preparing to strike the killing blow, but she was startlingly cut off by Heifer, who shoved her aside with his own club raised. Madura turned around in fright and screamed as she saw her district partner advancing, edging back towards the edge of the sand bunker and crying out with wide eyes that this was surely not the same boy she had been comforted by on the train, but her cries were cut off by him burying his club in her throat. Her cannon sounded moments later, and he gruffly turned back to his allies to ask for a replacement club. The momentary distraction had allowed the outlier boys to escape, a fact which greatly irritated the careers. They stood and stared around wildly, trying to figure out where the other alliance had gone, but resigned themselves to having been eluded after several minutes of searching. Meanwhile, during the chaos of the chase, Isla had climbed down from the tree with Chippy and carefully picked her way over to the patch of trees where the outlier boys had hidden, reasoning to her squirrel that no one would think to look where others had just been, to which Chippy chittered appreciatively. Exhausted from the day's wild events and not wishing to exert themselves any more, all of the 9 tributes still left in the arena rested themselves up for the night. The cameras panned out to show the careers in their central camp with their squirrels, Isla sleeping while camouflaged in the patch of trees with Chippy guarding her, and the outlier boys having retreated to the safety of an outdoor seating area in the front of the country club, where they were able to crouch under metal tables and stay covered under deep blue table umbrellas for the night, as the portraits of Sorghum from 9 and Madura from 10 were shown in the sky. The following morning dawned on the arena, and the careers awoke in a considerably better mood, having rested up and feeling prepared to track down the other remaining tributes. In fact, a new idea appeared to have occurred to them since they had shaken off the exhaustion of the previous day, which was to use their newly charged golf cart to cover more ground when scouring the country club grounds. The group instructed Heather to unplug and turn on the cart, which they would then use to drive around the area. He did so, plugging the key into the ignition as the cart roared to life, and all of the careers piled in with their weapons, looking remarkably like a group of well-dressed golfers off to hunt their next birdie, rather than deadly careers off to hunt their next tribute, as Rosalia put it. One of our analysts originally wrote, as Rosalia put it, on this document in the file as an attempt at golf-related humor, but we removed it for the sake of professionalism, and the analyst responsible was disciplined. The Career Alliance got off to a rocky start with their new golf cart, as their driver had never operated a vehicle before, resulting in the cart careening around the central golf green for several wild minutes before he was finally able to stabilize it, and they proceeded in a smoother manner across the bridge to the front of the clubhouse. Seeing no one in the area, Rufus directed Heifer to head left, where they flew right past Isla's hiding place without noticing her. However, the loud puttering of the cart had awoken her, and she scrambled to her feet as Chippy chittered and they both stared at the retreating cart of careers. She used this time to scurry over to the outdoor seating area near the front of the clubhouse, not realizing that the Outlier Boys Alliance was already there, and smacked right into Arbor. Both of them reeled back as Arbor appeared shocked that his district partner was still alive, and Squirrely McSquirrelface chittered excitedly upon seeing his friend Chippy. Arbor invited Isla to hide with him, though Thorn and Akil glared at them as it was apparent that they did not like the idea of adding another member to their alliance. However, Isla carefully assured them that she meant no harm and would work with them as closely as necessary in order to neutralize the threat that was the 5 remaining members of the Career Alliance. The boys nodded cautiously, but Akil waved a meat cleaver at the Sevens and reminded them in accented English that this would be their fate if they tried to team up as district partners and work against the other boys. Arbor and Isla gulped and hastily agreed. Nearly a half-hour passed before the golf cart of careers returned to the central portion of the arena. During this time, they had been scouring the outside area near the perimeter, though no one dared actually to disembark from the cart, after recalling what had happened earlier in the games when another tribute had gone near the perimeter. Once they arrived back at their camp to hydrate and take a moment to collect themselves before heading back out, the group engaged in a small conversation about where the other 4 tributes could be. They had narrowed down their options from the wooded areas at the perimeter, but there were still 18 golf holes and an entire clubhouse left to search. Jules suggested they try the clubhouse before wasting more time and energy looking around the golf holes, a sentiment which was agreed to by her allies and which they all carried out a moment later by hopping in the cart and puttering over the bridge to the club entrance. Suddenly, Adora let out a shout and jabbed her sharpened golf club in the direction of the umbrellas, noticing Thorn's large frame through holes in one of the picnic tables. Rufus, Contour, and Jewel also shrieked with glee and bellowed at Heifer to drive them into the picnic area. He obliged, and the cart plowed through the first several tables, sending the outliers scattering and fleeing in various directions. Thorn and Akil took off towards one of the far golf holes, while Arbor and Isla charged into the country club to avoid the zooming cart. Rufus hollered directions to pursue the two outlier boys going towards the golf holes over the ensuing chaos, as the cart could not enter the clubhouse. Heifer reversed, and the careers hung onto the cart's poles to protect themselves from falling out at its reckless speed. Tires squealing against the pavement, the cart hurtled back the way it had come and out onto the green, where it whipped around the course and quickly caught up to Akil, who had been stumbling through a sand bunker near the 15th hole. The cart screeched to a stop, and the pair from one leaped out from the back seat, bludgeoning Akil to death with their golf clubs and sounding his cannon before they smoothly hopped back into the cart and barked at Heifer to keep driving. Adora pointed out that she could see Thorn in the distance by the 11th hole, demanding that Heifer floor the gas to catch up to the agile outlier. Slamming the gas and whirling the cart around so quickly that it tore up grass and the careers clung to each other to avoid falling out, the cart zipped across the grounds, flying through golf greens and sand bunkers alike while narrowly dodging several trees in its path. It quickly caught up to Thorn in no time despite his efforts to deter it by zigzagging through the course and forcing it to avoid multiple large trees. At last, just as the careers caught up to him, Thorn dived into the lake, ensuring the golf cart could not pursue him any further. Growling, Rufus called, "Everybody out," and the careers disembarked to chase him on foot. Without hesitation, Rufus and Adora led the charge towards Thorn, who refused to go down without a fight despite his own inability to swim, and raised his meat cleaver defensively from the water. His squirrel followed, tail bristling as it jumped forward from his shoulder and prepared to bite the careers. However, despite his bold effort, he was no match for four strong opponents, each wielding golf clubs. The careers, with some help from their belligerent squirrels, soon took down Thorn in only a few slices of their sharpened clubs. His cannon sounded soon afterward, leaving his body to be collected by a hovercraft. Thorn's squirrel had one final statement, scratching Contour sharply across the face and causing him to wail in horror at the scar it left, before the squirrel was picked up by the hovercraft from the lake. This appeared to amuse Heifer, and he let out a small rumbling laugh, but he quickly stifled his laughter when the careers looked over at the noise. Meanwhile, as the careers speeded back towards the clubhouse from across the course, Arbor and Isla sprinted up the grand staircase with their squirrels in tow, headed for the management office near where the outlier boys had hidden earlier. Isla whispered something to Chippy, who leaped from her shoulder and scurried out of the office after they entered, while the pair from 7 tried to barricade themselves in with furniture. A few minutes later, Chippy returned, dragging behind her a folded bag of beef jerky from the restaurant below, which the pair hungrily consumed. Isla rubbed her head appreciatively as Arbor eyed the pair with envy, remarking that his own squirrel had not been very helpful so far. Squirrely McSquirrelface chittered indignantly and swatted Arbor with his tail, causing the boy to cry, "Ouch!" and slump irritably against the management desk. He glumly asked his district partner if they were the next to go after hearing 2 cannons, but Isla shook her head and replied hopefully that those cannons had belonged to the careers. Arbor raised an eyebrow skeptically, and even Isla had to sigh and admit that this was likely untrue. The pair searched around the office for any weapons that could help them, though Isla still had her golf club. To Arbor's delight, and with some help from his squirrel, they then located a stapler in the corner of the room, which he held out and prepared to use in the event that the room was invaded. However, even as they heard the careers tearing through the ground floor of the clubhouse, they trembled with fear at the thought of being found. At last, to their horror, a pounding was heard on the door to the management office and a muffled voice called out for reinforcements. The pair exchanged alarmed glances and searched frantically around for a place to hide, just as the furniture they had placed crashed out of the way and the door swung open to reveal the grinning Career Alliance. The careers and their bonus member entered the empty space and surveyed the area, which contained only a few bookshelves and the overturned furniture. They seemed startled to find that there were no humans in sight, despite the obviously barricaded doorway. Just as Contour was about to suggest that the group head out and keep looking, he felt a strange stream of something wet landing on his head and turned around in confusion, only to look directly up and find Arbor clinging to the lighting fixture in the room as Squirrely McSquirrelface urinated on his own head from above. The boy from 1 shrieked and fled the room, shouting about needing to find a sink as soon as possible and trying to shake out his glossy hair. Arbor, who had been grinning at his squirrel's untimely need to relieve himself, quickly shifted from amused to horrified as he realized that this incident had immediately drawn the career's attention to his presence above them. A snarling Adora bashed out one of the bulbs in the light fixture as an obvious threat to the boy, who was barely hanging above them by just 1.5 feet of space. The careers appeared to debate for a moment about how to knock Arbor down, until Rufus cocked his head and leveled his golf club at the fixture, remarking that all they had to do was wait until the boy's weight caused the fragile chandelier to fall down. Arbor blanched upon hearing this, though he had no choice but to remain in place for the time being. Isla had crawled into the air vent near the door after Chippy had used her claws to unscrew the vent opening, allowing her the privilege of remaining unnoticed but the difficulty of being unable to move freely without making noise. Evening faded to night as the careers settled themselves beneath the light fixture in the office and rested, not even bothering to choose guard shifts. The moment the Sevens heard their snores, Isla scampered away through the vents, leaving her worried district partner hanging, quite literally. Through the windows, Arbor noticed the portraits of Thorn from 11 and Akil from 15 in the sky, to which he grimaced, realizing that his strongest chances of taking out the careers were both dead. Several hours passed uneasily, only for Arbor to be awoken by a slight whispering coming from the direction of the vents. Isla had returned and was motioning to him to join her in the vents, indicating that she had found a way out of the clubhouse with them, but he shook his head furiously and jabbed a finger at the sleeping careers below. She sighed and insisted, waving her hand at him through the vent grate. Nearby, Jewel snuffled in her sleep and rolled over, frightening Isla and causing her to draw back her hand. Arbor glanced at Squirrely McSquirrelface, asleep in his shirt pocket, and reluctantly nodded to his district partner. He gingerly stepped 1 foot down onto the windowsill, the light fixture swinging slightly behind him, though he tried to steady it with one hand as he climbed down and picked his way across the snake pit of careers. Just as he reached the vent and Isla was about to pop it out to allow him in, Jewel's eyes opened and she stared directly at him. The chaos that followed was so rapid and occurred in such a dark space that the camera struggled to keep up with the action. Jewel yelped in surprise, waking up Adora and Heifer, who in turn woke up Rufus and Contour. The five almost tripped on each other to pursue Arbor as he dashed out the door of the office and skirted down the hall. To his shock, as he hurtled into the men's bathroom and listened to the thundering feet in the hall, a silver parachute floated in through the window, containing his very own shiny new golf club. Arbor grinned and darted back out of the bathroom, prepared to take on any challenge with his new prize. Behind him, Isla had scuttled out of the vents with Chippy and started to follow her district partner downstairs, only to see him smack right into Adora from behind by accident in the dark. Immediately, she whipped around and ripped her golf club across his neck with such force that it nearly severed his neck down to the bone. Arbor barely had time to gurgle before he collapsed and his cannon sounded amid the career's cheers, splattering his blood across the shiny golf club. Isla clamped a hand over her mouth to avoid screaming and fled down the stairs in the opposite direction from the careers under cover of darkness, running back out of the building to her original palm tree campsite. While the careers spent another few minutes in the dark looking for her, even they had to admit that it was impossible to see and that they all needed rest. Therefore, the Career Alliance headed back to sleep, while Isla tucked her legs beneath her and curled up to rest with Chippy perched on her shoulder, shaking. Once again, the next morning in the arena dawned bright and early, and saw the careers enthusiastically searching for their last non-allied opponent. Though they scanned all of the clubhouse for signs of her, they determined her to no longer be there, and headed back outdoors, where their golf cart had been patiently awaiting their next adventure. Rufus waved a hand to indicate that he wished for Heifer to turn on the vehicle, and the group was off to the races once more, zooming around the arena with the wind in their perfectly coiffed hair. Isla watched in mild amusement as the careers flew by, though it was clear that they had no idea of where they were going. After nearly an hour of searching, the Alliance returned to the central green that contained their former camp and agreed to take a lunch break. As soon as this break was over, the group mounted the golf cart once more, each member receiving their allotted golf club weapon as they set off in search of her. Just as Isla settled back down for another hour of watching them fail to locate her, she froze as she noticed that Heifer had seen her from the cart. She shook her head, believing herself to be imagining that he was looking in her direction, but he continued to stare up at her as his allies piled into the cart and instructed him to search around the 7th hole area. Yet to Isla's shock, the golf cart did not swing anywhere near her direction, nor did it start moving in the direction of the 7th hole. In fact, upon closer inspection, there appeared to be a struggle within the golf cart. The cameras quickly closed in on the cart to cover the events. As all of Panem looked on, instead of heeding the given instructions, Heifer had commandeered the golf cart and had a dark grin on his face as he determinedly drove it in the opposite direction, towards the rightmost of the sand bunkers on the central green. Rufus demanded to know if their ally had gone crazy and had forgotten how to listen to directions, while Contour and the girls clutched the support poles in alarm and tried not to fall out of the swaying cart. Isla nearly fell out of her tree in shock as she realized that the boy was driving the golf cart steadily towards the artificial lake. Jewel and Adora screamed and held on to Contour, the group's squirrels panicking, while Rufus shouted in anger that he wanted to know what was going on and why they were going near the lake. Heifer loudly honked the golf cart's horn and appeared to take great satisfaction in seeing the career's horrified expressions as he zoomed the puttering golf cart across the green. Rufus tried to take control of the cart but was promptly elbowed in the face. Jewel shrieked as they hit a bump and almost went flying into the air, demanding to know why he was driving so recklessly. Heifer turned around and remarked as they continued flying across the course that they should have known from the moment they allied him that he was not one of them. The careers were shocked speechless by the comment and could only hold on tightly as Heifer piloted the golf cart directly into the artificial lake at top speed, sending a massive wave of water crashing onto the shores. All of Panem waited with bated breath for someone to emerge from the water, be it the careers or their District 10 driver. After a long moment and several large splashes of water blooming forth from the lake, 4 cannons were heard in slow succession. A single hulking figure emerged from the water, soaking wet but alive, immediately recognizable to viewers across Panem as that of Heifer. Squirrelless but holding a bloodied golf club, he coughed up water at the side of the lake and flexed his fingers to regain feeling in them, having just fought with and slit the throats of his 4 former allies in the water with his club. Isla stared in complete shock from the events she had just witnessed, but failed to realize that she had stood up to watch the golf cart incident go down and was easily visible from afar. He noticed her once again at that time, standing in the tree with Chippy on her shoulder. His own squirrel had drowned with the careers, although Heifer did not seem too upset about this. Isla saw that he was staring up at her from the ground and shrunk backward, realizing she had no choice but to run or fight. She slowly climbed down the tree and raised her golf club as Heifer silently watched her from across the central green. Without warning, the pair began to circle each other, separated only by the few yards of golf green between them. Isla gazed grimly up at her taller opponent, her tan even more pronounced than usual in the gleaming sunlight, while Heifer's golf club appeared comically small in comparison to the muscular arm that held it out in front of him. They continued to circle the center of the golf green and each other as Isla's face broke into a sarcastic smile, and she casually joked that she had never expected to be playing golf in the Hunger Games, to which Heifer shrugged and replied that he had never expected to be wearing a clean shirt, which resulted in them both cracking cagey grins as they moved. After all of the chaos of these games so far, it was clear that both remaining tributes wished for them to be done, though neither appeared willing to make the first move. It was therefore Chippy who surprisingly leaped forward off Isla's shoulder, chittering a battle cry, and attached herself to Heifer's face, causing him to yelp and stumble backward as the golf club slipped from his hands in his haste to remove the scratching squirrel from his face. Isla giggled for a moment at the ridiculous sight before clapping a hand to her mouth and running forward, eyes fixed on the distracted opponent with determination. Just as she slashed her golf club down at his chest, Heifer, still grappling with the squirrel on his head, blindly rolled over on the ground near the central golf hole, and Isla's attack missed him by inches. She quickly recovered and aimed again, trying to attack without accidentally harming Chippy in the process. The moment that Heifer managed to fling the squirrel off his pace, she successfully buried her golf club in him, though at the last moment he had thrown his arm up to defend himself and it became lodged in his bicep. She dragged it back out with great effort as he winced and clutched his arm, dragging himself back to his feet. Isla went in for another hit, narrowing her eyes, but Heifer spun around and uprooted the flagstick in the golf hole behind him, leveling it at her from the ground. Isla scowled and charged forward as Chippy recovered from the shock of being thrown and launched herself at Heifer once more. Scrambling to his feet, he knocked Chippy aside with the force of the flagstick and charged at Isla, the tension between the pair quite tangible. The flagstick and golf club clashed against each other, wielded by 2 strong opponents with equally strong wills, as Chippy lay behind them on the golf green, stunned by the impact of the flagstick. Almost as if fencing, Heifer and Isla slashed their weapons at each other with sweat running down their necks and their blonde hair shining like spun gold in the brilliant sunlight. Rosalia attempted to perform a play-by-play, but even she could not tell who had the upper hand in the fight, and she gave up after a few minutes, leaving it to the cameras to paint the picture and tell the story. At last, after several minutes of metal against metal and gritted teeth against gritted teeth, Heifer summoned his last ounce of stubbornness and lunged forward, sending both himself and Isla crashing into the golf green and tumbling several feet away. Yet he was also the first to scramble back up, tiredly crawling over to Isla with the flagstick still in hand. Isla's wide, terrified eyes gazed up at him with pleading as she struggled to get up and on her feet, grimacing, but they were met with the unmerciful gaze of a butcher who witnessed death every day. Without hesitation, as if he were slaughtering a cow back at home rather than a tribute, he exhaled sharply and plunged the flagstick into her throat as Chibi let out an anguished squeak from nearby. Isla went limp, resigned to the same fate as her great-aunt Lilac, while Chippy weakly plodded over to curl up on her shoulder as she had done every day for the past week, and they breathed their final breaths together. Heifer staggered up from the ground and dropped the flagstick in shock as the girl's cannon sounded, though he seemed to barely register his victory. Head game maker Marin, sounding unusually distressed and defeated compared to their past games, declared over the arena that Heifer Muller of District 10 was now the victor of the 105th Hunger Games, the first quinquennial quell of the third incarnation. As a hovercraft arrived to collect Isla and another entered to pick up Heifer, he appeared initially startled in his exhaustion from the heat before a wide grin broke out across his face and he pumped his fists with great relief. Heifer was found to have sustained no major injuries during the final fight or his golf cart joyride and was cleared to show up in person for his interview. He arrived in a bright pink vinyl cowboy outfit, complete with a matching hat and boots, as well as a viciously triumphant grin. Many Capitol viewers seemed shocked but amused at the unconventional interview outfit and his new attitude, but Heifer appeared to be enjoying the reaction he had created. Rosalia, who sported a sleek white dress with plastic see-through panels, which she explained was a reference to both this year's arena and next year's arena, admitted that she certainly had a lot to dissect with this victor's interview. Before starting the interview, she explained that his victor's nickname was to be Deadly Driver, named for both a variety of golf club and his reckless driving skills that surely would have gotten him ticketed had he been driving in the Capitol, which provoked laughter from the audience and caused Heifer to cheerfully tip his cowboy hat. The first question she asked Heifer was about if he had chosen to join the careers on purpose, with the intention of betraying them from the start, or if he had simply stumbled into the opportunity and chose to betray them later. Heifer grinned and answered that he had this plan all along. He went on to state that he had known his muscles and looming figure would have made him a target for alliances, so he had intentionally moved slower than normal and pretended to be startled when approached by the careers at the bloodbath, banking on their appreciation of an extra meat shield for most of the games. He had discussed this plan with his mentor before the games and it had been approved for use in the arena, though Aeschylus had cautioned him of its many risks. Indeed, he admitted that he had played down his intelligence for most of the games and played up his strength, refusing to train his squirrel and giving unintelligible responses to the careers when he was asked a question. Heifer went on to say that from the moment they had located the golf cart and brought it back to camp, he had been biding his time, plotting his strategy, and waiting for the right moment to use it. While he conceded that his strategy might have appeared boring to Capitol viewers, at least it had gotten him out of the arena alive. They continued to discuss the games and analyzed where Heifer's allies and opponents had made poor choices, although Rosalia still seemed distracted by his hot pink cowboy costume. He admitted that it was very much like showing his true colors, as he had hidden himself away for most of the games and downplayed his strategy for success, explaining that the games to him had been just like his job as a butcher's assistant back in District 10. When Rosalia questioned the meaning of this statement, he simply grinned and remarked that only two things mattered in both butchery and the games: methods and executions. He then shrugged and continued that he had simply selected a method and had certainly performed the executions, as footage of the golf cart full of careers plunging into the lake was shown in the background. Heifer received a standing ovation from the Capitol audience, who appeared delighted by the spectacle he had created in the studio that night, and was cheered as he shook Rosalia's hand, tipped his hat to the crowd to whoops and wolf whistles, and left the stage. However, Rosalia was also slated to be the bearer of bad news after Heifer exited. Appearing slightly nervous, she stood in front of the main camera and read off a cue card to the audience for the first time that night. The announcement was that head game maker Marin had unfortunately been experiencing some burnout as of recently after the events of the 105th Games, namely the escape of a tribute from the arena, and would be recuperating on an extended vacation in the Mexican lands. They would not be returning next year for the 106th Games, nor any future games. A replacement for the head game maker was to be named next year from among the Capitol's most prestigious young military officers. Upon his return to District 10, a group of Heffer's wealthier fans in the capital raised money to have a golden golf club forged to be displayed in his front garden. In addition, he purchased a luxury golf cart with his winnings and could be seen frequently freewheeling around the district in it, even to complete mundane errands like purchasing groceries or visiting relatives. Heffer would go on to mentor future District 10 tributes, although it was reported that he often did not get along with some of his mentees, as they did not possess his killer instinct or strategic inclinations. He never married or engaged in relationships, but supported a large extended family and was known as a good uncle to his nieces and nephews, and a popular victor with the capital for his unique path to victory and his extravagant behavior. One notable aspect of Heffer's life, which has been chronicled extensively across multiple files, is his long-lasting feud with District 5 victor Austin Clark. Apparently, the feud started when the pair were seated near each other at an official event, and Heffer exclaimed in indignation that Austin had killed the hot actor from District 15, which we presume to be referring to Janvier Picard. He was reportedly quite resentful and had wished that Janvier had won the 103rd games instead of Austin, as it was noted by our researchers that he owned a cardboard standee of Janvier posing in a movie poster, which he traveled with at all times. However, this feud appeared to be one-sided, as Austin was never made aware of Heffer's irritation with his victory. Nevertheless, while Heffer's advice to his mentees varied over the years, one part always remained consistent, which was to never trust the sneaky fives. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this rather quirky quell. I know it was kind of an unusual one, but I wanted to start off Panem Reborn with something a little different from what you're used to. I hope you'll continue to tune in for future episodes. I'd really appreciate it if you did. And I hope you will continue to like and comment and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And please feel free to join the Panem Reborn / Tales of the Hunger Games Discord, which is linked below in the description. I promise, no, Heffer Muller is not holding a golf club to my head, nor is he going to drive me into a lake in a golf cart in order for you to join. So please join if you're interested, but thank you so much, and I hope you have a good day, afternoon, morning, night, evening, whatever you might be. And remember, Panem today, Panem tomorrow, Panem forever.